Hey Pops, you lost? The Renaissance Fair is back in town. Not here, the voice, slick with the unearned confidence of a 20-something NCO, cut through the dry desert air at Camp Pendleton. Sergeant Kyler Evans, star sniper of his scout sniper platoon, gestured with a thumb toward the old man standing alone at the edge of the 1,000-yard range. The man, weathered and worn as the leather on his boots, held not a rifle, but a long, polished wooden bow. It looked like a museum piece, an anachronism against the backdrop of carbon fiber stocks and high-powered optics. His squad, a handful of young, cocky Marines, snickered behind him. They were the kings of this domain, masters of windage and elevation, gods of the single, perfect shot. The old man didn't turn. He simply continued to run a piece of beeswax along the string of his bow, his movements slow, deliberate, and imbued with a patience that seemed to absorb their mockery without reaction. He wore simple denim jeans and a faded olive drab t-shirt, his white hair cut short in a style that hadn't been fashionable in 50 years. He looked like someone's grandfather who had taken a wrong turn on his way to the fishing pier. Evans, emboldened by his audience and the man's silence, sauntered over, his state-of-the-art M40, a 6 rifle slung casually over his shoulder. The weapon was a masterpiece of lethal engineering, a stark contrast to the primitive tool in the old man's hands. Seriously, old-timer, this is a live-fire range for United States Marines. You can't just be out here with that thing. He flicked a finger at the bow, a gesture of pure, unadulterated contempt. The old man finally looked up. His eyes were the color of a washed-out sky, and they held a depth that Evans mistook for senility. "I have permission," the old man said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble, like stones shifting at the bottom of a river. It held no anger, no defensiveness, just a simple statement of fact. Permission? From who? The ghost of Robin Hood, one of the younger Marines, a lance corporal named Diaz, chirped from the firing line. The group erupted in laughter again. Sergeant Evans smirked, placing a hand on the small of his back and puffing out his chest. He was the alpha here, and this old man was an unwelcome disruption to his pack's dynamic. "Look, I'm the range safety officer for this platoon, and I'm telling you, you're a hazard. A bow and arrow. On a sniper range? Do you have any idea what we do here? We're sending 308 rounds 1,000 yards downrange with sub-MOA precision. What are you going to do? Puncture a cardboard box at 50 feet. The old man ignored the jibe. He carefully placed an arrow on the string, the fletching a traditional pattern of gray and white feathers. He sighted down the long shaft, not at the nearby targets, but toward the distant steel silhouette shimmering in the heat haze 1,000 yards away. It was a movement born of a million repetitions, a fluid economy of motion that was almost hypnotic. For a fleeting second, Evans felt a flicker of something other than derision, a hint of practiced grace that didn't fit the doddering old man persona. But he quickly quashed it. The guy was a relic. A joke. "Hey, I'm talking to you." Evans snapped, his tone hardening. "Show me your range pass." Now the old man slowly lowered the bow and reached into his back pocket, pulling out a worn leather wallet. He produced a simple, laminated card and handed it to the sergeant. Evans snatched the card from the old man's hand. It was a special use pass, signed by the base commander himself. His eyes narrowed. He'd seen passes like this before, usually for VIPs or civilian contractors testing new gear. This guy was neither. The name read, Arthur Corrigan. Underneath, in the space for purpose, were 2 words, standing invitation. Evans felt a surge of irritation. Some desk jockey colonel probably did a favor for a family friend. It didn't matter. This was his range today. Standing invitation or not, you're interfering with active training, Evans said, handing the card back with a dismissive flick. "My Marines are qualifying today. This is about maintaining combat readiness, not indulging someone's medieval fantasy." He turned to his men. "All right, listen up. Let's show the old-timer what real marksmanship looks like." He unslung his rifle and settled into a prone position, the bipod kicking up a small puff of dust. He went through his pre-shot routine with theatrical precision, adjusting his scope, checking the wind with his kestrel meter, and talking his spotter through the process, his voice loud enough for Corrigan to hear every word. "Wind is 2 miles per hour, full value from the left. Add 1/4 MOA. Mirage is running straight up. Looks good." He took a breath, let it out, and the rifle cracked, a sharp, authoritative sound that echoed across the valley. A second later, a distant ping confirmed a solid hit on the 1,000-yard steel. Impact. Center mass, his spotter called out. Evans pushed himself up, a smug grin plastered on his face. See that, Pops? That's what we do here. Technology, precision, and skill. Not sticks and string. Arthur Corrigan simply nodded, his expression unreadable. He had seen thousands of shots like that. He'd seen better. He'd seen worse. The shot itself was meaningless. It was the man behind it that mattered, and what he saw in Sergeant Evans was a dangerous cocktail of talent and pride, a combination that got men killed. Evans, misinterpreting the nod as acquiescence or perhaps awe, decided to press his advantage. He wanted to humiliate the old man into leaving. "You know what? I'll make you a deal," Evans said, his voice dripping with condescension. "You seem to think you belong here. So prove it." He pointed toward the distant target he had just hit. "You see that steel down there? The one I just tagged? You put one of your little wooden darts anywhere on it, and I'll personally carry your gear back to your car. Hell, I'll even wash it for you." The other Marines howled with laughter. The proposition was absurd. Hitting a man-sized target at 1,000 yards with a high-powered, scoped rifle was the pinnacle of marksmanship. Doing it with a traditional longbow, with no sights, no mechanical assistance, was a physical impossibility. The arrow would lose too much energy, be thrown wildly off course by the slightest breeze. It was a fool's errand. "But when you miss," Evans continued, his voice turning sharp, "and you will miss, you pack up your toy, and you get off my range. And you don't come back when my platoon is training. Deal." The range master, a gunnery sergeant who had been observing from the tower, started to get on the radio, likely to shut down this unprofessional circus. But he paused, his eyes on the old man. Arthur Corrigan looked at the target, then back at the arrogant sergeant. A long moment of silence stretched out, filled only by the whisper of the wind. Finally, he gave another slow, deliberate nod. "Deal." The laughter died instantly. The Marines stared, first at the old man, then at their sergeant. They had expected him to shuffle away, embarrassed. They hadn't expected him to accept the impossible challenge. Evans himself was taken aback for a second before his smug grin returned. This was even better. Public humiliation. "All right then," Evans boomed. "Let's clear a lane. Give the archers some room." He waved his arms theatrically. The other Marines moved aside, their smirks a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. This was going to be pathetic. Arthur Corrigan paid them no mind. He selected 3 arrows from his quiver, checking each one meticulously. He planted his feet in the dusty ground, finding his anchor. He wasn't looking at the target anymore. He was feeling the air, his face turned into the slight breeze, his eyes closed. He looked like an ancient statue, a monument to a forgotten way of war. Just as he was about to knock the first arrow, the crunch of tires on gravel announced a new arrival. A black government SUV rolled to a stop a few yards behind the firing line. The dust had barely settled when the passenger door opened, and a figure emerged, tall and ramrod straight, the single star on his collar gleaming in the harsh sun. It was Brigadier General Marcus Thorne, the base commander. A wave of panic washed over the platoon. Every Marine snapped to attention, their mockery forgotten, replaced by a rigid, fearful posture. "As you were," General Thorne said, his voice calm but carrying an authority that made the crack of Evans's rifle sound like a firecracker. He didn't look at the platoon. His eyes were fixed on the old man with the bow. His hardened, command-level face, a mask of professional stoicism, melted away, replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated shock and reverence. "Art?" he breathed, the name barely a whisper. "Arthur Corrigan, is that really you?" Sergeant Evans felt his blood run cold. The general knew this old man. Not just knew him, but spoke his name with the kind of awe a young private might reserve for a Medal of Honor recipient. Arthur Corrigan turned, and a slow smile creased the corners of his weathered eyes. "Marcus, you've put on some weight." "And a star." General Thorne actually chuckled, a warm, genuine sound that none of the Marines had ever heard from him. He walked forward and, to their utter astonishment, embraced the old man in a firm, respectful hug. "It's been too long, Gunny." Way too long. He pulled back, his eyes scanning the scene. The smirking Marines, the arrogant sergeant, the bow in Art's hand, and the distant target. His expression hardened again, the warmth vanishing as he turned his gaze on Sergeant Evans. "Sergeant," the general said, his voice dropping to a dangerously quiet level. "Report. What exactly is happening here?" Evans swallowed, his throat suddenly bone dry. "Sir, General, sir, we were conducting long-range qualification. This civilian, Mr. Corrigan, was on the range, and I was concerned for his safety. Sir, the lie was so thin it was transparent." General Thorne's eyes, cold as chips of flint, bored into him. "You were concerned for his safety? Or you were mocking a man who has forgotten more about marksmanship than you will ever learn?" He didn't wait for an answer. He turned to the assembled platoon. "Do any of you know who this is?" he asked, his voice rising, not in anger, but in profound disappointment. He gestured toward Arthur. "This is not Mr. Corrigan. This is Gunnery Sergeant Arthur Corrigan, United States Marine Corps, retired. He was a senior instructor at this very sniper school before any of you were born. He served 3 tours in Vietnam with 1st Force Reconnaissance Company. He is the recipient of 2 Navy Crosses, 3 Silver Stars, and 5 Purple Hearts." The air became thick with unspoken shame. The Marines stared at the ground, at their boots, anywhere but at the old man they had just ridiculed. The general wasn't finished. He took a step closer to Sergeant Evans, his voice now a low, cutting whisper that was more terrifying than a shout. "You stand there with your 50-pound rifle and your computer-aided scope, boasting about a 1,000-yard shot, and you have the gall to mock a man who once held off an entire NVA platoon for 2 days with nothing but a K-bar and a captured rifle until his team could be extracted. A man known to the enemy only as Lin Han, the Ghost, because he could move through the jungle without a sound and kill without a trace." He turned back to Art's bow. "You see this antique?" he asked the platoon at large. On his second tour, then Sergeant Corrigan's team was tasked with taking out a series of enemy observation posts deep in the A Shao Valley. They couldn't risk the sound of a suppressed weapon. For 3 nights, Gunny Corrigan crawled through wire and minefields, and with a bow just like this one, he silently eliminated 12 enemy sentries, allowing his team to complete their mission without a single casualty. That mission saved the lives of an entire company of grunts who were scheduled to walk into a prepared ambush. The silence on the range was now absolute. The giggling Lance Corporal looked like he was about to be sick. Sergeant Evans's face was pale, his smug confidence shattered into a million pieces. He looked at Arthur Corrigan, truly looked at him for the first time, and saw not a frail old man, but a living monument to the very ideals he claimed to represent. The quiet dignity, the patient movements, the deep-set eyes, it all made sense now. He wasn't being senile, he was being patient. He wasn't being weak, he was demonstrating a strength Evans couldn't comprehend. He had stood in the presence of a legend and had treated him like a fool. The shame was a physical weight, pressing down on his chest, making it hard to breathe. General Thorne let the weight of his words settle. He then turned back to Art, his tone shifting back to one of deep respect. "Gunny, I apologize for the behavior of my Marines. There's no excuse for this level of ignorance and disrespect." Arthur Corrigan waved a hand dismissively. "They're young, Marcus. Full of fire. We were the same." He looked over at the pale-faced Sergeant Evans. "Pride is a heavy pack to carry. Sometimes you have to be taught how to set it down." The general nodded. A thought seemed to strike him. "Sergeant Evans issued you a challenge, I believe?" Art confirmed with a slight nod. "He did." The general's eyes held a glint of steel. "I think you should accept it." He looked at Evans. "And you, Sergeant, will spot for him. You will call his shot. Is that understood?" "Sir, yes, sir." Evans croaked, scrambling to grab his spotting scope and tripod. He fumbled with the legs, his hands shaking. The role reversal was complete and brutal. He was now an accessory to the very miracle he had mocked. Arthur Corrigan gave the general a small, knowing smile. He wasn't doing this for pride. He was doing it as a lesson. He walked back to his spot, the platoon parting for him like he was Moses at the Red Sea. He picked up the first of his 3 arrows. He moved with the same unhurried grace as before, but now everyone watched with breathless anticipation. He knocked the arrow, his fingers finding their familiar place on the string. He drew the bow back in one smooth, powerful motion. The heavy, 80-pound draw should have been a struggle for a man his age, but the yew bent to his will as if it were an extension of his own arm. He held the full draw, his anchor point solid at the corner of his mouth, the fletching of the arrow brushing his cheek. The world narrowed until only he, the arrow, and the distant, shimmering target existed. Sergeant Evans had his high-powered spotting scope trained on the target. Through the lens, he could see the small, black circle of his own bullet hole, dead center. It was a perfect shot. He felt a fresh wave of shame. "Target is hot," he reported, his voice cracking, using the formal language of the range as an anchor in his swirling sea of humiliation. Arthur Corrigan didn't seem to hear him. His eyes were focused on something beyond the target, the wind, the air, the very fabric of the distance between them. He held the draw for an impossibly long time, his body a statue of stored energy. Then, with a release so clean it was almost imperceptible, the string twanged. The arrow was gone. It leaped from the bow, a thin dark line arcing high into the blue sky, impossibly high. It seemed to hang at its apex for a moment before beginning its long, silent descent. The platoon held its breath. It was a beautiful, ridiculous, hopeless flight. Through the scope, Evans followed its path. It was drifting right, carried by the breeze he had so expertly calculated for his own shot. It was going to miss by 100 feet. But then, something strange happened. As it fell, the crosswind seemed to lessen, and the arrow straightened its course, plummeting toward the earth with terrifying speed. A collective gasp went through the platoon. A heartbeat later, a faint thwack echoed back to them, a sound completely different from the sharp ping of a bullet. Evans stared, disbelieving, through his scope. The arrow had struck the steel. It hadn't hit the center, but it had slammed into the upper left quadrant of the silhouette, its shaft quivering with the impact. Before anyone could cheer, or even speak, Art had knocked and drawn his second arrow. He released. The second arrow followed an almost identical trajectory, arcing high and then plunging down. Thwack! It hit the steel less than 3 inches from the first. He knocked the third. Drew. Released. Thwack! The third arrow struck home, forming a tight, 3-inch triangle with the other two. The range was silent. Evans zoomed in with his scope. The current sniper record for a 3-shot group at 1,000 yards, set by a visiting MARSOC team with the best equipment money could buy, was 38 inches. Arthur Corrigan, with a piece of wood and string, had just put 3 arrows into a group that couldn't be more than 3 inches. He hadn't just hit the target. He had broken their record. For a full minute, nobody moved. The only sound was the wind whistling past the range tower. The sight of the 3 arrows, clustered together in a feat of impossible archery, held every Marine in a state of stunned paralysis. They had witnessed a miracle, a myth made real. General Thorne was the first to break the silence. He started clapping, not the polite applause of an officer, but the thunderous, heartfelt ovation of a fan, of a fellow warrior who knew he had just seen greatness. One by one, the other Marines joined in, their applause echoing across the empty range, a tribute to the quiet old man and his antique bow. Arthur Corrigan simply lowered his bow, a faint, tired smile on his face. He looked less like a triumphant hero and more like a craftsman satisfied with a job well done. Sergeant Evans slowly stood up from his spotting scope, his face a mask of awe and profound remorse. He walked toward Arthur, his steps hesitant. He stopped a few feet away, took a deep breath, and executed the sharpest, most sincere salute of his life. "Gunnery, Sergeant Corrigan," he began, his voice thick with emotion. I have no words to express how deeply sorry I am. My arrogance, my disrespect, it was inexcusable. You are everything I aspire to be as a Marine, and I treated you with contempt. I am ashamed, sir." Arthur returned the salute with a slow, tired nod, then let his hand fall. He looked at the young sergeant, and there was no anger in his eyes, only a deep, weary wisdom. "The rifle is a fine weapon, Sergeant," he said, his voice soft. "But it's just a tool. It can make a good shooter better. It can't make a good man. The deadliest weapon in the world is a Marine and his will to fight. Never forget that. The steel and the wood don't matter. The heart does." Evans could only nod, tears welling in his eyes. General Thorne stepped forward, placing a hand on Evans's shoulder. "Your punishment, Sergeant, will be to report to Gunny Sergeant Corrigan's workshop every evening for the next month. You will learn how to fletch an arrow. You will learn how to read the wind without electronics. You will learn what it means to be a warrior, not just a technician. This is your one and only chance at redemption. Do you understand? Crystal, sir, Evans said, his voice filled with gratitude. The punishment was a gift. It was the greatest honor he could imagine. The day ended with an image none of the Marines would ever forget. The legendary ghost of the A Shao Valley, Gunnery Sergeant Arthur Corrigan, standing in the fading light, patiently showing the humbled young sniper how to properly hold a longbow, passing a timeless lesson from one generation of warrior to the next.